I'm Commander Ann Mannix, and I'll be your co-MC today for this event. Let me see what my notes say. I don't want to miss anything. It's so important. Okay, I oversee the crisis intervention team, and I asked my boss, Deputy Chief Mike Redmond, if I could have this assignment because I'm so passionate about mental health. And over the course of my career, I've realized that we really don't do enough for those suffering with mental health issues. Nationally, we don't. Locally, we do not. And I just think that medical professionals, politicians, and others need to do more. So again, it's a real passion for me, and that's why I asked for the assignment. Today, you're going to hear about 11 incidents where officers utilized different kinds of techniques. Officers and one dispatcher, sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out there, utilized different kinds of techniques to successfully resolve incidents with people in crisis. And with that, I want to introduce my co-MC, Courtney Brown, who is the Heartline Director right now for San Francisco Suicide Prevention. And before I finish, sorry, there's a few add-ons that I want to mention. We have representatives from David Chu's office here, and Scott Wiener, thank you for being here. I don't know where you moved, but again, thank you for being here. They've provided certificates for each officer. And then forthcoming is a Board of Supervisors certificate for each officer, in addition to the plaques that your captains will be handing out to the great work that you all did. And eventually, you'll end up with ribbons for your uniform in regards to the incidents that you were all involved in. And Courtney, sorry to make you wait. Come on up.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'm honored to help MC this event. As Commander Mannix said, I'm a representative from San Francisco Suicide Prevention. I've been a hotline director there for 7 years, and I can't tell you how impressed I have been with San Francisco Police Department's support of the mental health community, especially how they have time and time again helped to de-escalate people in the verge of crisis. So these awards are so vital to providing acknowledgement to the amazing work that is being done in the community every single day, when often community members only get to hear about the incidents that they aren't supportive of. There are so many incidents, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds annually, that deserve acknowledgement, deserve people supporting them and receiving awards. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pass it back over to Commander Mannix. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. So can I get everyone to stand up, please, for the presentation of colors and the playing of our national anthem?
Time.
Next, Police Chaplain Megan Rohrer, she's nodding, Rohrer, is going to be leading us in the benediction.
I invite you to embrace the faith that you carry, or the faith that you have in fellow humanity, or the faith that you find in the training and in the wisdom that we have shared together through the police curriculum and through the command staff. Center yourselves in gratitude. Center yourselves in compassion and peace. Claim self-care more often than you think you need to. And for those who are feeling a bit anxious about getting an honor when so many brave acts happen every day that maybe don't get acknowledged, I want to thank you for being a blessing to us, for letting us thank you, and to thank the families and friends who have gathered for blessing us through the support that you provide to all of the officers in this space. May safety surround us, may love hold us, and may compassion be the undergird of all that we do. Amen.
Please have a seat. Before I introduce my boss, I want to tell you that the Chief of Police is in front of the Board of Supervisors right now talking about budget. So he's delayed, but I'll tell you he's very supportive of the program and very proud of the work that you've done and that we're all doing out there. And with that, my boss, Deputy Chief Michael Redmond.
Thank you. I also spoke to the chief on the way over here, and he wanted me to extend congratulations and thanks to all the officers here today for their brave acts on all that will be described as we move through the program. So good afternoon and welcome to the 4th Annual Crisis Intervention Team Awards Ceremony. We have come together today to honor San Francisco police officers and Department of Emergency Management dispatchers for the extraordinary efforts they have made to preserve human life by applying the CIT principles and techniques they have learned in their training. One of the keys to police work is communication, whether it is simply taking a statement from a witness to establishing a connection with a person in crisis that enables de-escalation. The ability to communicate is key in our profession. World-renowned FBI hostage negotiator and author Thomas Strenzi once wrote, "We learn when we listen." These San Francisco public safety professionals lived that credo as they sought to establish a rapport with people that were in crisis. Today you will hear and celebrate the stories of police officers and dispatchers who have put their CIT training into practice. You will hear how these professionals, ranging from a new academy recruit, a dispatcher on the end of a 911 call, to an officer preparing to retire, I believe that might be Sergeant Pat Tobin, used CIT principles and training to resolve intense situations. None of these public safety professionals will tell you that they are heroes. Every one of them will tell you that there is someone they work with or that there was someone else on the scene that deserves the award that they will get today. Their peers will tell you different, that on the phone or on the scene that day, these professionals delivered safety and calm in very stressful situations. Their leaders will tell you different because they saw the extraordinary effort and the amazing results that these professionals delivered in the midst of crisis. I know they are all probably very uncomfortable being given an award for their actions because this is something they do every day. and they know that their brothers and sisters in public safety have also routinely and successfully practiced the CIT concepts on the streets to deliver safety and calm to people in crisis hundreds of times. If our job is to listen and offer hope, then to all of you I say, job well done. To all of the families and friends here today, thank you for being part of our extended family and supporting these officers day to day. We all know the toll this profession can have on you being part of our extended family, and I consider you heroes just like the awardees today. So at this time, I'd like all the officers in uniform to stand up and give a round of applause to their family members in attendance. Thank you. And lastly, I just want to embarrass one of my colleagues, Deputy Chief Denise Schmidt, after 28 years in the San Francisco Police Department, is going to be retiring in 7 days. But Denise is a mentor to me. She's helped me a lot in my position in field operations because she had that job. But I think on the command staff, she's held every job throughout the department. And even as an officer and working through the ranks, she's always worked patrol, investigations, and one of the few people that has been on the command staff that has worked every job. And Denise, thank you very much for everything you've done for me in this department over the last 28 years.
Next, I'll be introducing Brian Copeland, who's going to be our keynote speaker today. Brian Copeland is an award-winning actor, comedian, author, playwright, television radio talk show host based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Copeland is a fixture in Bay Area broadcasting. I'm sure that you've all seen him somewhere before, where he's hosted programs on just about every television station, including KTVU, ABC7, and KNTV. He has written and performed 4 stage plays, including The Waiting Period, about which chronicles his own experience with depression, and I can't recommend highly enough. It's extremely powerful and is playing regularly at the Marsh in San Francisco. Brian is a strong advocate of the importance of mental health care, and we are honored to have him here today. Brian?
Thank you, and good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here today. It was kind of weird when I was first invited to come out and speak. The invitation was, would you come and speak at our award ceremonies for the San Francisco Police Department? And I said, I'm not falling for that. This is about that bench warrant, huh? But it is an honor and a pleasure to be here. I was not aware of CIT. Until I was invited to come out and speak, and I was sent some of the amazing stories that officers are going to be honored for their participation in and the way they handled today. This is such a critical and vital program, because as I read these stories, I think about there were so many ways that these situations could have gone wrong. You have a guy who's suicidal, who's on a ledge, somebody else who is, I guess, in a warehouse, shooting at someone who is not there. There's so many ways that these situations could have gone wrong. But because of the training and because of the compassion that was exhibited, those folks are still here. As was mentioned, I have come about becoming an advocate for mental health in kind of a backwards way because I have suffered from depression my entire life. I did not know it, and I was not officially diagnosed with depression until I was in my late 30s. But looking back, my entire life, since I was a kid, growing up in San Leandro. I grew up in San Leandro at a time when, in the early 70s, when it was like 99.9% white and me. Which is really funny. When I go to my high school class reunion, they gave me a name tag. Stop it. So I grew up, with strangers driving down the street and, adults yelling the N-word out the car window and all of these kinds of things. And I had some unfortunate incidents with police when I was younger in that town. And I would isolate. I would go and I'd sit in my room and I'd close the door and I would read my comics and not go out anywhere. And I realize now that those were signs of depression. It really manifested itself in a strong way with me when I was 14. My mother passed away suddenly when I was 14, leaving me and my 4 little sisters. We were ages 1 through 14 with my grandma, who took care of us by herself after that. When I got older, I would have bouts. Bouts were, again, with me, I would isolate primarily, meaning that I didn't go anywhere. I would sit in the house, and unless I had to go somewhere, unless I was getting paid to go and do a show or to perform or something, I would stay home until it passed. Sometimes the bouts would last, for a number of days. Sometimes it would be weeks where I wouldn't leave the house if I didn't have to. And again, I didn't know what it was I was dealing with. And there is a mental, these horrible messages, at least with me dealing with this, that are playing out on a loop in my head. You're worthless. You're useless. The world will be a better place without you. Why are you here taking up air? Why are you here taking up space? And when you isolate and you're not talking to anybody, you hear this over and over and over again, and that's the only voice that you get. So when back in 2008, over a 6-month period between 2007 and 2008, I hit a real low point. Over the course of that 6 months, my grandmother passed away suddenly. I was on the air doing my show at KGO talk show, and I got the call that she had had a stroke and was probably not going to make it. Then, about a month after that, my wife decided she didn't want to be married anymore. Just one day woke up, and I'm sure it took more than a day to get there. But I would say that I left because I was divorced because my wife was ill. She was sick of my crap. But she decided, after my grandma died, she decided that she didn't want to be married anymore, and so that started a spiral. Then I got into a car accident. I was driving to give a talk at Piedmont High School, and I got into a car accident on Highway 580. A car slammed on its brakes. Another car hit that. I hit the last car. And after I got in this car accident, I didn't go to the doctor. I went on. I did the speech I was supposed to give. Then I went jogging. I ran 6 miles. Then I would start to have this numbness in my hands and my feet, and I go to the doctor. They do an MRI. They say, "Oh my God, you got to have surgery now, or you're going to be a quadriplegic." There was a bone in my neck that was pressed against the spinal column. So I was at this point then after this where I'm by myself. I've had these 3 horrible things happen. The recovery, I'm laid up in a neck brace. I'm taking Vicodin and painkillers, and that loop. That voice is playing over and over and over and over again. You're useless. You're worthless. All these horrible things happen because you're a terrible person. All these horrible things happen because they are your fault. And this is divine retribution. That's what this is. So I decided I was going to end it. And I went to a gun store, and I bought a .32 caliber Beretta Tomcat. But as you all know, in the state of California, there is a 10-day waiting period before you are able to obtain a firearm. So during that 10 days, I went through a change. And where the change happened was when I talked to somebody, when I told somebody what was going on inside my head. I told my parish priest, who I didn't know at the time, till after I came to him, also suffers from and deals with depression. And it was talking to him and telling somebody so that I had another voice besides the one saying you're worthless, you're useless, it's better off if you're not here, who encouraged me to go and to get help and made me come to my senses. Because the thing that you're dealing with when you are somebody dealing with depression or mental illness is when you're not in your right mind. You're not rational, which again is something that makes these stories that I read all the more fascinating and really indicative of the bravery of the officers. Because to deal with somebody who is not in their right mind, to deal with somebody who is irrational, you can't use logic. You have to find a way to de-escalate the situation because it can go bad in so many ways. So I did not pick up the gun, which is why I am still here. And I wrote the play that was mentioned, the waiting period, to tell the story, with the idea being that what was amazing is I found out there were so many people I know who I thought, wow, you have it all together. Your life is charmed, who are dealing with exactly the same thing. But because here in our society, depression and mental illness are stigmatized. And that's what's killing people. Because people are so afraid and so embarrassed, quite frankly, to have this disease. Excuse me. And it is, in fact, a disease that they don't want to speak about it. And again, they don't tell somebody, and therefore they don't get the other voices other than the loop that's playing out over and over and over inside their heads. So we have to, I think, as a society, get to the place where we erase the stigma of mental illness and erase the stigma of depression, because I was raised thinking that depression was a weakness. It was a character flaw. And if you admit that you were dealing with it, then, that means you're a weak person. It means that you are flawed. And you know what? Guess what? We're all flawed in some way. And what's so weird is it is, in fact, a disease. In fact, I was reading, it is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Suicide is, and suicide brought on by depression and by mental illness. You would not be embarrassed to talk about any other disease that you had. You wouldn't be embarrassed to talk about, if you had Lou Gehrig's disease, you wouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed to tell. You wouldn't think it was your fault. You had cancer, you wouldn't think it was your fault. You wouldn't be embarrassed. But for some reason, with this, we are. So until we can get to a place in this society where we look at, and I hope that we've had a couple of high-profile suicides in America over the course of the last couple of weeks. And so people are talking and people are starting to have the conversation. When Robin Williams passed away a couple of years ago, that was a teaching opportunity, it was a learning opportunity, and we started to have the conversation. Then it went away, and hopefully with what's just happened recently, we'll continue to talk about this. But until we do, and until we start to look at it as the disease that it is, instead of being a character flaw of some kind, we're going to continue to see these kinds of tragedies. And until then, the work that you do is extremely important, and it's more and more important. There are people who are just so shocked when I tell this story, because they'll look at me and go, "Oh, the stuff you do, you're on TV, you're a comic, you deal with that. How could you always telling jokes? You're always telling jokes. How could you be dealing with depression when you're always telling jokes?" And you know something? I will let you in on a secret. Stand-up comics, if you put 100 stand-up comics in a room and you said, how many of you suffer from depression, 99 hands would go up and there'd be one liar. I mean, that's why it is, and I realized that as I started to look into myself and research this issue after my waiting period, that one of the reasons that comics and a lot of entertainers do what it is they do, comics especially, is we're laughing so we don't cry. That's it. We're laughing so that we don't cry. That's how it is that we deal. So with that, I think that the work you were doing with CIT in the CIT training is so important, and I'm just so surprised that I've never heard of it. And I think that it's really important that this is more highly publicized and that more people in the community know exactly what it is that you're doing and what this training is. Because I was talking with Denise before the program began about how you will have situations where if something has gone bad in a situation like this, you'll see somebody who's in crisis who won't want to reach out to the police because of the fact that they're afraid of what happened in the situation that went bad happening to them. Or family members who, oh my gosh, you know, I have my brother's in crisis, I should call the police, but what if it goes wrong? What if it goes bad? And I think that if people now, and if people are aware of what it is that you're doing, and that, you know, you are trained to de-escalate, you are trained to do everything you possibly can to help the individual, even at the risk of your own lives and your own safety, I think that will, I think it will save a lot of lives, in large part because of the fact you will remove that apprehension that some people have about dealing with law enforcement in situations like this. So I'll leave you with the message of the waiting period and what I tell my audiences at the end of it. And by the way, I do this show for free. I do it most Sundays at the Marsh, Sunday afternoons, and it is free to the public because I want to spread the message that you're not alone, you're not by yourself. And if I can stand up and spill my guts to strangers every week for 75 minutes, you can tell somebody that you were having thoughts that are not in your best interest. And it's paid for through donations. We have a GoFundMe that funds the program. So I do this every week. But the message is just tell somebody. You know, if you're hurting, if you're struggling, then tell somebody. And the fact that you are doing what you're doing with CIT means that people who are struggling can feel comfortable and can feel safe telling you. And I just think that's invaluable. Congratulations to all the award recipients. And again, thank you very, very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Brian. Before I go on and introduce the next speaker, I was remiss. I forgot to introduce the two newest members of the Police Commission. I'm very sorry. John Hamasaki and Cindy Elias. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. But welcome, and thank you for coming. And with that, I'm going to introduce the real brains behind the whole operation, Lieutenant Mario Molina, who's going to give you an oversight into our programs.
Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here. To the honorees, great work. I listen to the radio every day and listen to our officers respond to calls. And it makes my day every time they're saying, I'm CIT trained and I'm responding to the call and start asking for resources. That's what the whole thing is all about. Creating that time and distance, creating rapport, and asking for resources when you need them. But she said the brain, actually it's the leadership. And I want to acknowledge my, my boss, Commander Mannix, and Deputy Chief Redmond. They actually took me in because I was bouncing all over the place in the department. And it made sense at the time that I'll be in FOB, and they made it happen. So it's because of their efforts. And other, DC Moser, who's here too, he was my first supervisor, and Commander O'Sullivan, I don't see him, but he was also one of the pioneers on the CIT program. It's because of their leadership. It's because of their support. It's because I see their faces when I ask for resources, and and he goes, okay, we'll make it happen. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that. So just a brief overview of the program. The CIT program, it has two components. It has the training and the psychiatric unit. So in the training, we do 40 hours. That's taken after the Memphis model. Officers are exposed to different training curriculums. Some of the highlights will be suicide by cop, PTSD, implicit bias, self-care. We do identifying signs and symptoms of mental health, drug use. We also have panel presenters that come from NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and from the San Francisco Mental Health Association, SOLVed, that come and present their part on how they live with mental illness, or how they're living with mental illness, and how they're in the process of recovery. So this is very powerful for our officers because we not only talk about the illness, but we also put a face to it. And it's very important to do that. It's very important to, like Brian was talking about, how people are very skeptic about talking about mental health. We all are. But when you put a face and a name to the disease, it's easier because you get to know the person. You get to know what they're going through. And you meet them at that level, at the level that they need to be treated at. So we do that, and we also do a 10-hour, and Adam's seeing here Sergeant Colleen and Sergeant Anderson, who are the force behind that. They're probably in the back setting up. Oh, there they are. Can you please step up? Because these guys have been amazing, honestly. We started the 10-hour tactical training. Don't go away. Last year in February. And so far, you guys, we have put 1,628 officers through it. And it's because of their dedication with our Sergeant Leonard in FOB, who helps with the scheduling. It's amazing. 1,628 officers that have gone through the tactical training and the use of force for the staff in the academy. So that makes it happen. It's just two human beings here that dedicate their time, the entire schedule to work with the officers, with the assistance of the TAC units and the hostage negotiators that come and do the role playing. So thank you for doing that. And then the other half, I had the side unit, Sergeant Kelly Kruger. I know you're sitting in the audience there. And Sergeant George Luque in the back, Officer Manfredi, and the new member of the unit, Sean Fulgado. I know you're somewhere. So they're the ones that actually respond up to the crisis calls with mobile crisis, and they spend a lot of their time putting out fires. And that's what we call it, putting out fires, because the phone just keeps on ringing. And I will give you some numbers of the work that we're doing. But for the 40 hours, as of right now, we have 895 officers trained, and the number goes up and down. I had 897 last week, but 2 of them decided to retire. How dare them? And so my numbers went down to 895. In the Metro Division, we had 329. Golden Gate Division, we had 271. And the specialized units, we had 295. So if you look across the board, across the city, the Metro Division, Central Station has 67 officers that are CIT trained. Southern has 69, Mission 73, Northern 60, Tenderloin 58, Bayview 67, Park 47, Richmond 41, Ingleside 61, and Terraville has 55. So that ensures me that at least there's 1 or 2 officers working in every shift throughout the 24-hour period that the police department operates, because we don't close. We stay open. So it's very important to know that there's 1 CIT trained officer. And to be honest, the San Francisco Police Department as in large has been practicing the same de-escalation skills since I entered the department that I knew about the police department back in 1994. But these officers had gone through the specialized training and just a little tad more knowledge of responding to people in crisis. We also did the promotionals. Recently, the department had some promotions, and we promoted 9 captains, 30 lieutenants, 76 sergeants. So these new bosses went through the training. They went through an 80-hour leadership program, and we included the tactical training that we have into that 80 hours period. So as I mentioned before, we had the 1,628 officers, and you can see it on the screen, on the next screen, how they're distributed across Metro and Golden Gate. So we're pretty much even. Our hope is we'll be done with the tactical training sometime in October. So we're almost done with patrol, and we're now hitting administration bureaus and investigating bureaus. But we have prepared a video for you guys that will show what the CIT training is about and how our officers respond to mobile crisis on the street at least twice a week.
I'm a sergeant. What about you? Oh, there we go.
Hey, that's Lily from up on Haight Street. Remember me? Yeah. Doing all right?
Many of my coworkers will say, wow, I just came, the police were interacting with somebody on the street and they were like really amazing and taking their time and distance, and these are the things that officers are taught in the CIT training.
In CIT, we teach sort of 3 core principles of creating time, distance, and rapport. And I've seen officers use that, whether they've been actually CIT trained or not, they've been seeming to get the message of using time, distance, and rapport. And by time, slow it down. Distance, don't approach and overwhelm too quickly. And rapport, try to establish a conversation or rapport to de-escalate people and calm them down.
But you need to come down here so I can talk to you a little bit more about it. Do I have to be handcuffed? You do have to be handcuffed, just so we can make sure you don't have any weapons on you, okay?
And let's talk. We can work this out. You just got to come on out with us. Why don't you text her out here? Why don't you put the phone in your pocket? Come on out and talk to me, and then we'll go ahead and we'll be able to text your friend once we talk. You guys got everything you need. I just need you to stay away from the gun. Please do not go for the gun.
Till you and I are actually friends, I don't know you enough to trust you.
Can I sit in the front seat of the car if we go somewhere?
I have to put you in the back because my partner sits up front, but I'll take you on a nice scenic route. How about that?
Can I listen to the radio?
You can pick the station.
All right.
Can you step down for me over here? Can you take your hands out of your pockets? Okay, walk toward me slowly. Okay, stop right there. Get down on your knees, please.
Sometimes it's about balancing the idea of safety needing to happen now versus taking a little bit more time to maybe communicate differently, find another word, find another phrase. And what I see is police officers slowing themselves down, thinking about what's really going on with this person.
We'll get you some water.
I'm not going to die today.
Of course you're not. You need some water?
I need water. I need water.
Okay, we'll get you some water, okay?
I need water. I need food. I need sleep. I just have to see my doctor now.
We can help you out with all of that.
You promise? You promise?
It's been my personal experience that anybody who takes meth, one hit of meth, I'm looking at a 5 to 7 hour window before they come down, before I can communicate with them, or they do it again, and then I'm back up again for another 5 to 7 hours. So just keep that in mind. You might be doing this for a while just to calm this person down, but just know that as long as the person's not charging or anything, you're doing the right thing. You're creating that time and that distance.
One of the reasons that we're here is because there have been officer-involved shootings, with mentally ill folks. So there's a lot of trust, I think, that the police have, that they now have some experience and some understanding of how not to rush into things.
So here you go. Carlos, I'll throw this to you, okay?
Please. I understand.
All right, okay. Carlos. Now, Carlos, now listen to me, Carlos. Carlos, do you mind approaching me, right, walking towards my boys?
I think that the overall community perception of police as there to help and create safety, I think that will improve over time as more officers are trained. I think only good things will come from this.
I want to thank the Media Relations Unit for putting the video together for us. Thank you so much. A lot of people ask me, how do you measure the success of the CIT program? I know there's numbers, and we're working on the data that eventually will be put out reports on how we measure some of the training that we've done and how successful it is. But today, to me, there's no more proof that these officers and sergeants that had employed de-escalation skills and have brought these incidents that were volatile, that were out of control, to a safe resolution for everyone. The person in crisis and the officers that responded to the calls, and the family members that were present during the incident. So thank you so much, and enjoy. You when I hear great stories.
Well, he made it. I'd like to introduce now Chief of Police William Scott.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me say I apologize for being late. I got kind of held up at our budget hearings with the Board of Supervisors, and I'm in a little bit of a crisis right now myself because I left both of my cell phones. I was changing so quickly, and as you know, we live and die by our cell phones, so I'm like, I feel really naked up here right now without my cell phone. I had a 3-page speech. I'm going to skip the speech. I know I walked in late, so I'm just going to speak a little bit from the heart and tell you what I really think about this program. And for the families and those of you that are here to support the awardees, thank you for being here. You know, this CIT program, I believe, and I think I'm qualified to say this because I came here from another city and I kind of looked at the SFPD from the outside in before I actually became a member of this great department. I believe is probably the best program in the nation, and the way we do what we do with the collaborative efforts and how we get to really refine the work of crisis intervention, I believe, and I know I'm biased on this, but I believe it's the best in the nation. And I don't say that because I'm wearing this uniform. I say it from an outsider looking in, coming in to a new organization, and I say it because the work that's being done is simply phenomenal. You are asked to do a lot. You being the officers that are sitting here that are being awarded these great awards today, you have to make split-second decisions that can be life or death if you make the wrong decision. But at the same time, you're asked to de-escalate and slow things down. And when you think about that, that sounds maybe simple to some people, but think about that. Split-second decisions that can be life or death decisions, but at the same time, we ask you to slow it down, de-escalate, take your time. They kind of work against each other. It's kind of counterintuitive. That really illustrates how complex these issues are, and some of the people that we have to deal with, that you come in contact with, that are in crisis, how difficult it is to really do the work that's been asked of you. And I know you don't do it alone. We have a lot of help. We have a lot of collaboration. But the stories that you will hear today, and I think I've probably seen and heard all of what you will hear today, are simply amazing. They're inspiring. It represents the best of this organization, the best of this city. And to your families, I know many of you probably don't share these stories when you go home at night. If you're like me, your family probably never knows the dangers and the risks that you face. But I want to tell you, for those of you that will hear some of these stories for the first time, the work is simply amazing. I am so proud to be associated with you and associated with this organization, and whatever I can do as Chief of Police to support this great work, you have my commitment. So thank you for being here. Families, awardees, thank you for the work you've done. To the leadership team, none of this happens without leadership. To Commander Mannix, Deputy Chief Redmond, Lieutenant Molina, they have done a phenomenal job in getting this program to where it is today. So I just want to say thank you very much for everything that you do. Thank you.
And now we're going to get into the awards. But before I bring up Captain Yep of Central Station, amazingly, the first event was caught by someone's cell phone video, and it was broadcast on a local station the night it happened. So we have that video, and we're going to show it to you right now.
Time in San Francisco tonight, police are reporting a sharp drop in the use of force. Reported incidents down more than 15% in the first quarter compared to a year ago. Force was used in less than 1% of all calls for service. Also, assaults on officers dropped 45%, and this all comes after police changed their tactics. Only on 5 tonight, KPIX5's Joe Vasquez shows us an example. Joe?
Yeah, Ken, here at the Safeway Street on Jackson Street, shoppers were very alarmed at what they saw. There was a man standing out here with a sharp object in his hand. Looked like he was trying to cut his own throat, and they were worried that he might try and hurt somebody else.
I'm not talking to them.
As San Francisco police officers arrived last Thursday, they saw the man clearly out of control. He began to cut his wrists along with his throat. He was acting aggressively, waving a broken bottle as police tried to get him to calm down. Officers on the scene drew their weapons, then called for police negotiators. In the meantime, they followed the man as he walked through several properties, making sure not to get too close. Give the suspect space and time, the new police training protocol.
De-escalation is exactly that, giving time and distance. But they did notice that he continued to try to hurt himself, and at that point they did have to intervene.
Officers fired a beanbag shotgun, called a less lethal weapon in police parlance. It feels like a strong punch to the chest. No effect. They fired another beanbag shot. This time the man dropped the broken glass and was placed under arrest.
What did I do?
They did try to negotiate.
Jody Kupchandani shot this video with her cell phone. She says at first it was the swarm of cops that worried her.
There were like 12 to 15 police officers there, a lot of them. I thought it was more scary for so many police officers.
At the end of the day, what did you think about how the police handled it?
Definitely the policemen saved this guy's life.
You think they saved his life?
Yes.
Well, he did survive. He made it to the hospital for treatment. As for the cops, well, they don't get a medal for something like this, just another day in the life. But it really did give the rest of us, the public, a glimpse into the real-life situation and the new tactics at work. Reporting live, Joe Vasquez, KPIX5.
So I'm going to ask Captain Yep and Lieutenant McGeckern, Sergeant Tobin, retired Sergeant Tobin, Officer Collins, Officer O'Keefe, Officer Oropeza, and Officer Viscerel to come on up. Come on up, Paul. I think Joe Vasquez is here today, too. Okay.
Thank you, Commander Mannix. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege and an honor to be here today. And we just saw the video version, so I'm going to tell you the novel version. On May 4th, 2017, at approximately 3:53 p.m., San Francisco Police Dispatch broadcast a call for service regarding a man cutting his own wrists in front of 245 Jackson Street. Numerous officers responded to the scene. Officer Stephen Collins, a CIT-trained officer, along with his partner, arrived and located an agitated and incoherent man bleeding from his neck and wrists. The subject held a broken glass bottle to his own neck. Officer Collins and his partner maintained a safe distance, called for additional police units and a sergeant to the scene, and established a perimeter. Officer Collins started talking to the man, who repeatedly told him, "Call my auntie. I want to hear her voice." Officer Collins established a dialogue with him by asking him more about the man's aunt. Sergeant Tobin arrived on scene and utilized the crisis intervention team concept as trained. He organized a team consisting of Officer Collins, who is CIT trained, Officer Jennifer Visceral, who is CIT trained, Officer Oropeza and Officer O'Keefe, who used their less lethal weapons, and Lieutenant, then Sergeant McEachern, who is also CIT trained, and established an arrest team. Sergeant Tobin directly supervised the CIT team during this incident, while another sergeant managed the scene. The man, agitated, incoherent, and armed with a broken bottle, walked up a set of stairs to an open area near an entrance to a public park. Sergeant Tobin and the CIT team maintained visual as well as verbal contact with the man in order to protect bystanders in the area. The erratic subject jumped over a guardrail and onto a ledge. Officer Visceral attempted to get him to move back to a safe position. Officer Collins began asking the subject more questions about his aunt and was able to establish a rapport that got the man to climb back over the guardrail to a safe position. Despite this positive interaction, the scene remained dynamic, fluid, and times dangerous for the responding officers. The man continued to hold the broken bottle to his neck and continued to be very agitated and aggressive. The officers demonstrated personal courage and a calm resolve to help the man. Even as he advanced on officers, he got as close as 8 feet while holding the jagged bottle out as a weapon. As one officer later stated, we maintained our distance in order to protect people in the area and de-escalate the situation, but not as far as we would have liked. Officer Collins and Officer Visceral continued to try and engage the man in a dialogue, but they were unable to gain his attention for more than a few seconds at a time. It was when the man sliced his own neck that officers felt they had to use an alternative strategy to save the man's life. Officer Oropeza gave the man commands to put the bottle down. The man continued to try to cut himself. Officer Oropeza notified the officers on scene that he was going to use a less lethal shotgun in order to prevent the subject from lethally injuring himself. Officer Oropeza delivered the less lethal rounds, and the man dropped the bottle. Officer Oropeza ordered the man to get on the ground. The subject picked up the bottle again and turned towards the staircase. Officer O'Keefe delivered additional less lethal rounds, and the man dropped the bottle. The arrest team converged, placed the subject in handcuffs. Officers summoned an ambulance who transported the subject for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. This incident is an excellent example of the efforts that the San Francisco police officers make every day to preserve human life. The officers utilized their CIT training and a team concept. They demonstrated a dedication to preservation of human life and showed personal courage combined with tactical patience in the face of danger. Their actions were in line with the finest traditions of the San Francisco Police Department and reflect great credit upon themselves, their stations, and the crisis intervention team. Thank you so much.
The next award will be presented by Captain Darrell Fong at the Southern Station. He'll be presenting awards to Sergeant Joshua Espinoza, Officer Omar Alvin Jera Jr., and Officer Christina Galande.
Thank you. I'd first like to extend my congratulations to all the award recipients tonight, or this afternoon, on such an incredible and distinguished honor. Good afternoon, Chief Scott, command staff, distinguished guests, members of the community. It is my distinct honor to share the exemplary actions of these three fine officers which merited the receipt of the department's Crisis Intervention Training Award. On April 30th, 2017, at a little after midnight, Southern Station officers Omar Alvarenga and recruit officer Brian Smith were dispatched to a report of a mentally disturbed person on the roof of Yerba Buena ice skating rink at 750 Folsom Street. Upon arrival, Sergeant Josh Espinoza, Officer Christina Galande, and Officer John Ching had already arrived on scene and made contact with his subject in a state of crisis, later identified as Mr. Davis. Sergeant Espinoza immediately took command of the incident and quickly coordinated a perimeter with responding officers, allowing contact officers to utilize crisis intervention training techniques, creating time and distance in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Officer Galande, a CIT trained officer, initially stood on the ground level attempting to communicate with the subject, who is standing on the ledge of the roof approximately 40 feet above them. While attempting to coast the subject down from the roof, Officers Galande and Alvarenga repositioned themselves onto a roof access ladder on the southeast side of the building to allow for better communication with the subject. However, due to the dangerous flat-edged roof terrain where the subject was standing and his proximity to the ladder, the officers did not attempt to access the roof due to concern over being grabbed and dragged off the roof by the subject. Officer Galande served as the lead negotiator and switched off with Officer Alvarenga in communicating with the subject while standing on the roof access ladder during extremely misty conditions. A hostage negotiation team was summoned and responded to the scene, but was not utilized due to the tactical positioning and rapport established by Officer Galande and Alvarenga with the subject. The subject went on to explain to the officers during these negotiations that he lost $8,000 in gambling, that his wife had moved to Texas with his kids, and he had no way to get to them. The subject told officers he was severely depressed and may have taken medication along with a Molly cocktail at the same time. Subject repeatedly stated that he was an idiot, he had failed his family, and clearly he wanted to end his life. After negotiating for well over an hour, Officer Galande was successful in coercing the subject to come down on his own from the roof ledge via the roof access ladder. The subject was subsequently placed into custody by a team of officers who transported the subject to San Francisco General Psychiatric Emergency Services, where he was placed on a 5150 detention for evaluation and treatment. Sergeant Espinosa's leadership demonstrated during this incident, along with Officer Galande and Alvarenga's utilization of crisis intervention techniques, directly resulted in the prevention of a loss of life, bringing this incident to a successful outcome. These officers are to be commended for their exemplary response, so I ask you to join me in congratulating these officers for their actions of excellence in their receipt of the Department CIT Award.
All right, next up will be Lieutenant Eric Washington. And can I have to the stage Sergeant Tracy McCrae, Officer Richard Andreotti, and Officer Ediberto Martinez.
Okay, good afternoon. The award that I'm here to present this afternoon was in regards to an armed suicidal subject who was on a balcony. Okay, a frightened mother of 4 called dispatch and reported that her boyfriend and the father of her children had 2 knives and was threatening to kill himself. She further reported that the children were in the house with the man. Officers were told that the man had advised dispatch several times that he hoped that the cops would shoot him, which we know as suicide by cop. Knowing that the mother and her children were in danger, numerous San Francisco police officers, including Sergeant McCrae, Officer Martinez, and Andreotti, raced to the scene. Upon arrival, the officers evacuated the residence, the mother, the children from the house, and secured the perimeter. Sergeant McCrae, a CIT-trained veteran, Officer Martinez, and Andreotti swung into action. Sergeant McCrae and Officer Martinez made contact with the man while Officer Andreotti gathered information from his family who was outside. With other officers as backup, Sergeant McCray and Martinez made contact with the man. The man Sergeant Martinez and Officer McCray confronted was large, powerful, on the apartment balcony holding 2 knives, one in each hand. One of the officers later described him as a volcano that was ready to erupt. The man was initially shouting hostile and confrontational. He begged officers for them to shoot him. The only thing separated Sergeant McCray and Officer Martinez from the armed, hostile, and agitated men was the sliding glass balcony door. Sergeant McCray saw that there were no good tactical options and determined that the best course of action was to talk. Despite the potential dangers, Sergeant McCray and Officer Martinez began to engage the man through the sliding glass door. Meanwhile, Officer Andretti passed along information that he had gathered from the family that was crucial to Sergeant McCray and Officer Martinez's decision-making and communication strategy, such as mental health diagnosis and relationship information. Upon using the information and active listening skills, Sergeant McCray and Martinez were able to establish a rapport with the man. Officer Martinez and Sergeant McCray switched off talking as Officer Andretti passed along the information. Officer Martinez was particularly successful in breaking down the distrust that the man had of the police. At first, the man was asking the police to shoot him, but Officer Martinez was able to get the man to a calmer frame of mind by talking about his children. Sergeant McCray kept the man focused and realistic by talking about other options. Finally, Officer Martinez and Sergeant McCray were able to convince the man to throw the knives off the balcony, and a short time later, he was detained and taken to the hospital for a mental health evaluation. This incident was a team effort by SFPD. All the officers who responded contributed to the successful resolution of this incident. With their support, Sergeant McCray, Officer Martinez, and Andreatti were able to use CIT methods combined with personal courage, initiative, and tenacity to peacefully resolve the situation. The actions of these officers are in the finest tradition of the San Francisco Police Department and bringing great credit upon themselves, Bayview Station, and the CIT program. Thank you.
The next award will be presented by Captain Caltagirone from the Mission Station. He'll be presenting an award to Officer James Frisk.
Good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations to all the recipients of today's awards. Fantastic job from all. I'm here to give a little synopsis of what Officer James Frisk did to earn this fine award. In the early hours of a Sunday morning last year, dispatch received a call from a distraught mother in Los Angeles who reported her son had called her and told her he was going to kill himself in a hotel room in San Francisco. Numerous San Francisco police officers responded, including Officer Frisk, who was still in the field training program learning the job. And to this day, all of us still learn this job every day we're out here, no matter how many years we have in the business. When the officers went to the man's room, they attempted to get him to come out, but he refused. Officers were able to get the door partially opened. The man inside told him, "Stop." He screamed he had a knife and that he would kill himself and there would be blood everywhere. Because he would cut his own throat, he said, and if the officers entered the room. The officers recognized that this was an extremely dangerous situation, and in an attempt of using force, they slowed down the scene and decided to use other options. Officer Frisk engaged in the man's conversation from behind the door. Officer Frisk was able to establish a rapport with the man. The man told him that he loved this woman, but the woman had rejected him, and he wanted to take a pill to sleep forever. Officer Frisk was able to get the man to agree to communicate via FaceTime. And for those who don't know, that it's new to me too, but a lot of us have these new phones that you speak FaceTime. It helps well when you're trying to teach your kids how to jump a car too, with jumper cables. He continued to talk to the individual, and during this time, Officer Frisk could see that the man continued to hold the knife to his throat and occasionally pressing so hard that he would break the skin from the throat. That Officer Frisk could see this from the FaceTime phone. Officer Frisk established such a great rapport that when the hostage negotiator arrived on scene, he allowed Officer Frisk to continue to talk to the man while the negotiators provided guidance and direction. Eventually, the man agreed to open the door, but only if he could directly talk with Officer Frisk. Recognizing the danger of a face-to-face negotiation with an armed subject, Officer Frisk decided to take that chance. The rewards outweighed and persuaded him out, so he put himself in danger. He conducted a face-to-face talk, this time with the man, and the man finally threw the knife down. Instead of rushing in immediately, Officer Frisk continued to talk, and eventually the man was detained without incident and taken to the hospital for mental health assessment. As a result, Officer Frisk and his fellow officers' actions, a mother did not lose her son that morning. Officer Frisk and the fellow officers followed CIT principle to peacefully resolve a potential deadly situation. Officer Frisk demonstrated tactical patience and used time and distance to engage in a meaningful dialogue, displayed ingenuity in utilizing technology to remove a barrier to communication, and personal courage during the face-to-face negotiation to a peaceful resolve to this incident. Officer Frisk's actions are in the finest tradition of the San Francisco Police Department and bring a great credit upon himself, Mission Station, and the CIT program. Congratulations, Officer Frisk.
Alrighty, next up, we'll have Captain Jack Hart of the Ingleside Station and Officer Kenneth Anderson. Captain Jack.
Just Jack. Welcome, everybody, and congratulations to all the recipients. Fantastic work. San Francisco police officers responded to an address in the Ingleside Police District looking for a suspect who had just stabbed and murdered a family member in an adjoining police district. Numerous officers raced to the scene, including CIT-trained Officer Anderson. Officers met with an individual at the scene who confirmed that the suspect was still inside the house with his father. Officers entered the ground floor of the house and made contact with the suspect, who was at the top of the stairs on the second floor, and his father, who was hiding on the third floor. So again, Officer Anderson's at the bottom, the suspect's in the middle, and the father is trapped up at the very top. When Officer Anderson found out that the hostage negotiation team was 30 minutes away, he stepped up and he volunteered to start talking to the suspect. Now, despite the fact that the suspect was not contained, might still be armed, and was in a dominant upstairs position, Officer Anderson realized that in order to save the father, the other family members, as well as members of the public, someone would have to take this responsibility and jump in from this dangerous position at the bottom of the stairs and start to talk. Officer Anderson did not let the danger or the responsibility deter him, and he volunteered to step up as a CIT-trained officer. He began talking to the man as other officers provided cover, including members of Ingleside Station who were here to support Officer Anderson, including Sergeant Johnny Hong, who was also on scene, and a member of the CHNT team, who realized that Officer Anderson had such rapport, all he had to do was stand back and facilitate and to continue to allow the situation to develop. Officer Anderson was able to establish rapport with the suspect by using active listening skills and treating the suspect with dignity and respect. Soon after first engaging the suspect, Officer Anderson was able to reason with the suspect that the father had nothing to do with this and that he should be released, and the suspect released the father and let him go. Now, even though the father had been released, Officer Anderson and the other officers on the scene practiced effective CIT tactics by still waiting, instead of trying to rush up the stairs, by waiting and allowing the discussions to continue. Officer Anderson demonstrated empathy for the suspect's condition. Rather than looking down upon him and judging him and the actions that he had taken, Officer Anderson convinced him that peacefully resolving the situation was the best option, and emphasizing that he could get the mental health help that he certainly needed. The suspect was surrendered and was taken into custody without incident. Officer Anderson displayed personal courage by volunteering to take responsibility for negotiating with the hostage taker and by conducting negotiations with a wanted murder suspect from a position of disadvantage and personal risk to himself. He used his CIT training to build rapport and gain compliance that led to the release of the hostage and the suspect's eventual surrender. It was Walter Payton who said, "When you're good at something, you'll tell the world about it. When you're great at something, they'll tell you." Officer Anderson, we're here to tell you that you were great in that day as you continue to be at Ingleside Station. Your actions were in the finest traditions of the San Francisco Police Department. You bring great credit upon yourself and your family, Ingleside Station, and the CIT program. Congratulations, Officer Anderson.
The next award will be presented by Lieutenant Renee Pagano from the Taraval Station. She'll be presenting an award to Sergeant Eric Anderson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations to all of you for all your hard work. On Tuesday, March 6, 2018, at 20:52 hours, dispatch broadcast that a male subject had fired a gun in front of 257 Miramar Avenue. The 911 caller, who was the property owner, reported to dispatch that the subject was a disgruntled tenant and he was pacing in front of the apartment building with a gun. The property owner had fled the apartment and was speaking with dispatch from down the street. Taraval officers began to arrive on scene, and dispatch reported that the subject had fired a gun while he was standing outside of the building. The officers on scene did not see the subject outside and determined that he had barricaded himself inside of his apartment. Sergeant Anderson responded to the scene and set up a command post. Shortly thereafter, Sergeant Anderson obtained the subject's phone number and made contact with him. The subject answered the phone, and Sergeant Anderson began to establish a dialogue. During this time, the subject kept repeating, "Light me up, go ahead and light me up." And he refused to exit the apartment. Sergeant Anderson continued to build rapport with the subject and de-escalated the situation. Sergeant Anderson eventually convinced the subject to agree to come outside the house. The subject walked to the open front door of the apartment but refused to step outside. Sergeant Anderson left the command post and took up a position of cover from across the street and continued to talk with him in person. The subject was wearing a tight t-shirt and boxer shorts, so Sergeant Anderson could see that he was not armed any longer. For approximately an hour, Sergeant Anderson continued to build rapport and calm the subject down. H&T and TAC arrived on scene, and H&T took over the communications with the subject and eventually took him into custody without incident. It is clear that Sergeant Anderson's CIT methods, combined with compassion and determination not to give up, allowed the incident to come to a peaceful resolution. For without his intervention, there could have been a much different outcome. I was not surprised when I learned how Sergeant Anderson handled the situation. He always conducts himself calmly, professionally, and is an excellent role model to the officers at Taylorville Station. Sergeant Anderson's actions reflect the finest traditions of our department, and I am honored to present him this award.
Next up, Captain Carl Fabry from Tenderloin Station will present a pretty incredible event, but unfortunately the two recipients are in Southern California training, but it was a pretty amazing event that took place. Come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I first learned of this event at around 5 a.m. when my phone rang and said there was an active shooter at a hotel in San Francisco. I jumped out of bed and put some clothes on and started on my way to the scene. In the early morning hours of December 17th of 2017, shots rang out inside of a world-class hotel in San Francisco. A 911 caller reported multiple shots fired. As always, when danger threatens, the San Francisco Police Department responds, and this time was no different. Numerous officers from many stations responded to the scene. Among the first to arrive were Sergeant Ramos from Tenderloin Station and Sergeant Yick from Central Station. In the following minutes, these quick-thinking sergeants were instrumental in establishing situational command that enabled responding officers to use time and distance to peacefully resolve the situation. Sergeant Ramos made her way into the hotel, and contacted the reportee. Sergeant Ramos determined that the shots had come from a portion of the building that was under construction. When Sergeant Ramos learned there was high ground she could observe the construction area from, she made her way upstairs without hesitation. Sergeant Ramos spotted a man with a gun through the window of a nearby room. Despite the fact that she was potentially exposed to gunfire if the man saw her, Sergeant Ramos chose to maintain her position in order to keep other officers informed by broadcasting what she was seeing. She was able to direct officers into position to contain the armed suspect's location. Officers on scene initially believed there were more than one shooter. Sergeant Yick made phone contact with a man who had called 911 and said he was being shot at and that he had shot back. The man fired more shots while he was on the phone with Sergeant Yick. The man was initially unable to tell Sergeant Yick where he was. Sergeant Yick broadcast information he got from the man. Sergeant Yick, suspecting the man was in crisis, attempted to calm the man down, telling him to slow his breathing and calm down. The man was begging for help to come to his location and said he was feeling faint. Sergeant Yick was able to get the man to concentrate and describe his surroundings. As Sergeant Yick was talking to the man, Sergeant Ramos continued to radio information about the subject she had in her sights. As Sergeant Ramos described where the subject was and what he was wearing and what he was doing, Sergeant Yick realized that the man she was observing was the same man he was on the phone with. It appeared that the only person shooting in the building was that man on the phone with Sergeant Yick. Sergeant Yick recognized that the man was in crisis and presented a substantial danger to both the public and responding officers. Sergeant Yick established rapport with the man by being empathetic and reassuring the man that he was no longer in danger. Once the man acknowledged that the SFPD had made the scene safe, Sergeant Yick used the trust he had established to gain the man's compliance. Sergeant Ramos and Sergeant Yick applied CIT concepts and displayed personal courage, critical thinking skills, and good decision-making to successfully resolve this incident. The actions of Sergeant Ramos and Sergeant Yick were in the finest traditions of the San Francisco Police Department and reflect great credit upon themselves, their stations, and the crisis intervention team.
Next, Captain Tim Falvey from the amazing City Hostage and Crisis Negotiations team will be presenting on two different events. First, presenting awards to Sergeant Jennifer Hennessy-Jones and Sergeant Maureen Leonard.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Captain Tim Falvey. I'm the commanding officer of the Tactical Company, and I have the great privilege of presenting this award nomination. This is for Sergeant Jennifer Hennessy-Jones and Sergeant Maureen Leonard. On June 16th, 2017, in the early afternoon hours, San Francisco police officers responded to a call of a man armed with a knife threatening people in the area of the Alamany housing projects. The subject was seen running around the basketball courts, brandishing a knife and fleeing from private security officers in the complex. There were children out that day on the basketball court, and he was chasing them with this knife. Prior to police contact, the subject barricaded himself inside one of the apartment units. The responding officers located the subject and could see through the window that the subject was still standing there holding the knife. Though patrol tried numerous times to make contact with the barricaded subject, none proved to be successful. It was believed the subject was under the influence of narcotics. Neighbors told us he'd been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and that he may have been triggered by some bullying incidents that had occurred to him at the development there. Because he was armed and barricaded, a critical incident was declared. The hostage negotiation team sent Sergeants Jennifer Hennessy-Jones and Sergeant Maureen Leonard. The tactical units responded, the specialists came. There was a big police presence there. This further scared and kind of agitated the person inside seeing all these officers. Upon their arrival, Sergeants Hennessy-Jones and Leonard were briefed by patrol units, and they began developing a plan on how to approach the subject in crisis. Both sergeants took a position of cover behind a patrol vehicle in front of the building where the subject was barricaded. They established a line of communication with the subject, who was extremely agitated and acting irrationally inside the apartment, all the time walking around holding the knife. They recognized the special barriers to communication involved in this type of incident and kept the subject engaged in specific topics of interest to him. They used their hostage crisis negotiation team skills and de-escalation tactic training to build rapport with the subject. He was not only under the influence of alcohol, but was also developmentally challenged. They worked seamlessly as a partnership. They would go back and forth, one being the primary, the other being the secondary. And if the person started to lose focus with one, the other would step in right away and bring them right back in and keep them engaged and keep them communicating. After 5 hours of hard work, their dedication to the techniques of de-escalation and recognition of the important aspects of communication with a person in a behavioral crisis event and addressing the mental disabilities of the subject enabled them to convince the subject to surrender to the officers at the scene in a safe manner. Their actions are in the finest traditions of the San Francisco Police Department. Their actions are also reflective of some of the best new training in the San Francisco Police Department. They bring great credit to themselves, the hostage crisis negotiation team, and the CIT program. Congratulations, Sergeants. The next award is for Sergeant Jasmine Sugatan. And don't worry, this one's only 15 pages. San Francisco police officers responded to a complaint at a home. It comes in as a 913 or complaint unknown. The officers responding don't know why they're going there. They just know someone called 911. Maybe they hung up before they could give the information. So these are calls that always kind of raise your alertness as you're approaching because you don't know what you're walking into. Upon arriving, the officers made contact with a man in crisis who refused to come out of his house. A very lengthy standoff ensued, during which time numerous CIT-trained officers and hostage negotiators tried to talk this person out of their home, but were unsuccessful. After more than 15 hours of negotiations and engagement, Officer Jasmine Sugatan, she's now Sergeant Sugatan, responded as a CIT-trained hostage negotiator. Upon her arrival, she found a tense situation where she was advised that the man had threatened to commit suicide by blowing up his house. The man said he had turned on the gas inside and he was waiting for it to fill up. As a result of his threats to blow up his house, the officers had started to evacuate the neighborhood and the nearby homes. The man also threatened to jump off a second-story window and at one point came out of the window with a noose around his neck. So when officers were moving to clear the street and get the neighbors out of the area, the subject began assaulting the officers by throwing bleach on them from the second-story window. Later, he appeared to be placing some kind of a booby trap at the entrance to the home to slow down officers should they try to enter his residence. Sergeant Sugatan knew all of this as she prepared to engage the man in a dialogue that she hoped would peacefully resolve this crisis. Aware of the potential danger to herself, Sergeant Sugatan decided to engage the man face to face in order to start building a connection with him. She walked to the front of the house and called out to him through the second-story window. The man responded and she was able to keep him talking. It wasn't easy. The man was often irrational and would suddenly erupt into fits of rage, and he was having trouble focusing and remembering the topic of the conversation. Sergeant Sugatan demonstrated active listening techniques when the man became angry and when he was irrational, and in order to keep de-escalating the situation. Sergeant Sugatan's patience and understanding kept bringing the man back on topic and helped him build that rapport. She gained the man's trust and his compliance. He trusted her when she recommended that he come out of the house. After a total of over 20 hours of negotiations, the man surrendered peacefully to officers and was taken for a mental health evaluation. Sergeant Sugatan's tenacity, patience, personal courage, and CIT skills led to the resolution of a tense incident that had dragged on for hours. Her actions are in the finest traditions of the San Francisco Police Department. They bring great credit upon herself, Ingleside Station, and the CIT program in whole. She couldn't be here today. I believe she's at sergeant school, having been recently promoted. So we will read this to her at one of her lineups when she gets back. Thank you.
The next award will be presented by Commander Gregory Yee from the Airport Bureau. He'll be presenting awards to Sergeant Angelin Rodriguez and Officer Richard Morgante.
Good afternoon. It is my honor to describe the compassionate work of two of San Francisco's finest. On February 6, 2018, Sergeant Angela Rodriguez and Officer Richard Morgante, along with other officers, responded to a suspicious person who had kicked a vehicle in the domestic garage at the San Francisco International Airport. It was later learned that this suspicious person had also caused a disturbance at the USO by ranting incoherently. Upon their arrival at the garage, Sergeant Rodriguez and Officer Morgante located the subject who was sitting in his vehicle. The subject was not responding to Officer Morgante's questions and was becoming agitated. Officer Morgante asked him what was going on and how he could help him. But he, the subject, kept speaking incoherently and stating that he was trying to fly on Delta Airlines even though he didn't have any money and his vehicle had run out of gas. The officers knew that they had time on their side, they had to make distance, and they had an opportunity to build a rapport with a subject who had no obvious signs of threat, no obvious signs of a weapon. And in these situations, the unknown is just as concerning as the known. Officer Morgante continued to keep his calm and kept the situation from escalating. Officer Morgante used his communication skills and de-escalation skills to maintain an open line of communications with the subject who was not acting rationally. The officers did not know what was in the car or what this subject's intentions were. Sergeant Rodriguez noticed that the subject was not cooperating, so she asked him what would make him happy. He stated that he wanted money and his parents could send him the money. Sergeant Rodriguez seized this opportunity to garner his trust and cooperation. She was able to obtain the subject's parents' phone number. Sergeant Rodriguez contacted the subject's mother and learned that the subject had been living out of his vehicle for a month and was using narcotics. According to the subject's mother, he had been acting delusional and paranoid and had been making comments that his father was an FBI agent and that he was having him followed. Sergeant Rodriguez used her compassionate and convincing and calming communication skills to de-escalate the encounter with the subject. After further communications and engagements, Sergeant Rodriguez was able to obtain the subject's cooperation and compliance to get out of the vehicle so she could go and sign for the Western Union transfer, which there wasn't one at the airport. The subject got out of the vehicle and was detained without incident. Based on the subject's behavior and condition, Sergeant Rodriguez approved a 5150 hold, and the subject was taken to Mills Peninsula Hospital for a mental health assessment. Sergeant Rodriguez continued to follow up with the subject's mother by telephone to keep her up to date on the status of her son. Sergeant Rodriguez arranged for the subject's mother to pick up the son's vehicle at the airport. Later that night, Sergeant Rodriguez was still working, where she came across the same subject who had been released from Mills Peninsula. It wasn't 72 hours. Sergeant Regis, I can't even say your name anymore, then arranged for the subject to return home in Sacramento, California. Although not CIT trained, Sergeant Rodriguez, Officer Morgante used their leadership and their compassion to resolve a situation that could obviously had a different path. Recognized the Manning crisis, eased a mother's concern follow their hearts and minds to resolve a crisis. For their efforts, we thank you for a job well done.
Okay, we're almost there. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to bring up Director Robert Smuts of our Department of Emergency Management, who will present for Public Safety Dispatcher Samantha Conway.
Samantha? Thank you. Good afternoon. Absolutely last but not least, I want to thank the San Francisco Police Department for including us in the ceremony to start with. I made note of all the times in the previous summaries that dispatch or headquarters or 911 center was mentioned, and appreciate that. So May 9th last year, the Petaluma Police Department transferred a call that went to Samantha from a very distraught father. And as I listened to the call recently, it really hit home. I recently became a father, and it made me think what we would want for our loved one that is undergoing a crisis and what they need. I thought about how elevated I felt talking to the Kaiser advice line about this rash that wouldn't go away, and just how much I wanted to help my son, and how much how that felt to me, and how this father must have felt on the other line of this call. So he had just gotten off the phone with his son, and his son was elevated, more elevated than he'd ever known him before. He was high on speed. He had recently gotten a felony warrant in Petaluma, and he was just not in a good place. He was in a crisis, and his son was in San Francisco, which is why the call was transferred to us. And this father was obviously distraught. He at times was holding back tears, and just kept going back to how elevated his son was, and how he talking about suicide, and was afraid that this was going to be suicide by cop. And Samantha just calmly walked him through, and started with the callback number verification and the name, and then walked through what's happening. Where is he? What's his description? He's very tall and 260 pounds. Is he in a vehicle? 1989 Ford Econoline, green and white, camper van, beat up. What's the license plate? As the father kept talking about how painful this was and how his son was in a bad place, got the information, sent it up as an 801CR to get the right people on the scene, and get them the information they need. What might calm him down? What's a safe thing to talk about? He loves his dog. His dog's with him. Molly, he lives for his dog. This information to convey to officers on the scene so that they could resolve it successfully. And it was. He was detained, and Samantha was on the phone throughout the entire 15, 16-minute call, and was able to convey that to the father, which was a wonderful resolution to hear at the end. So I want to thank her for her work in that call, recognize it. Thank you for recognizing dispatch's role in all of this. Yes, I want to congratulate.
Well, once again, congratulations to all the recipients. And what would an award ceremony be without a list of thank yous? So Scottish Rite, great partners, thank you as always for being there for us. Mario, Kelly, Donnie, Laura, George, Carlos, and now Sean, thank you for all you do. And finally, and for the station liaisons, thank you for all you're going to do if anybody's here. And finally, to the crisis intervention team, I know a lot of you are here, Terry, Lynn, Giff, Camille, Samara, Jennifer, David, Courtney, Vinny, and the rest. Thank you for working with us to make a difference. And with that, I'm going to ask you to stand for the retrieval of colors. And after that, we have refreshments over there.